Hello and welcome to Simply Tax. Now, I sometimes get asked how we go about selecting the topics for our episodes. And really, it's just driven by what we're seeing and hearing from those that we work with, and from listeners just like you who have reached out with requests or ideas, which, by the way, we really appreciate, and you can do that right now by dropping us an email at bkd.com/simplytax. Whenever we get an area that overlaps with both a frequent topic of conversation and a request from a listener, well, that's one that we know we just have to cover. And that brings us to our conversation today with Dirk Cockrum, the National ESG Practice Leader for BKD's National Enterprise Risk Solutions Practice. Dirk brings his perspective with more than 25 years working in the energy and transportation industries to help both you and I better understand what ESG is all about, why it's become such a hot topic, how you as a business owner, executive, or even someone who advises one or works for one can develop and implement an ESG program and strategically help to improve operations performance and risk management processes. Now, before we get to the interview, I'd like to invite you to an opportunity to learn more about ESG from Dirk, along with two other hot topics for businesses in 2022 and beyond. In a world where there's so much coming at businesses and their owners, many are feeling overwhelmed and not sure where to focus their resources.
It's just an acronym. I like to say that. It stands for environmental, social, and governance.
How would you generally characterize the current cybersecurity threat environment right now?
Just exceptionally bad. I don't know a better way of framing it up. It's truly been impressive what they've been able to carry out, but in a really bad way. Like that should not happen. Big cybersecurity companies are being targeted, big corporations are being targeted, infrastructure is being targeted. They are not scoping anybody out of their site.
The same thing we've been talking about for the last 6 weeks. It's just a very, very slow process. Everybody's been reading about how far behind they are, about shifting 1,200 people to get out from the backlog, which it's one thing to shift 1,200 people, it's another to shift 1,200 people that know what they're doing.
I'd like to invite you to join me on Monday, February 28th from 1 to 4 p.m. Central as I moderate a virtual discussion brought to you by BKD CPAs and advisors with insights and guidance on protecting against cyber threats, implications of recent and upcoming tax legislation, and environmental, social, and governance expectations and frameworks. I hope to see you there, but if you can't make it or are listening to this after it airs, an archive will be available. Sign up and learn more with the link provided in the show notes of this episode, available at bkd.com/simplytax. And with that, I'm excited to share with you my conversation with Dirk Cockrum on ESG. Oftentimes I find that that's a big question is what is this ESG thing in the first place? So What is it? What does it stand for? And how do you describe it if you're given that stereotypical elevator speech, I guess?
It's just an acronym. I like to say that. It just stands for environmental, social, and governance. I say all the time, and this is not my original thought. You hear this from other people. It would be better served to be reversed if it was governance, social, and environmental. A common misconception is that the main thing is environmental. It's actually not. In most, particularly in the ratings agencies, they give the greatest weight to governance. Social and environmental is second. I think the thinking is if you have good governance, a lot of other things fall into place. Certainly is acute now with, what's happening with the employment workforce and the Great Resignation, just how important social is in attracting and retaining employees. But ESG it's really a set of metrics and standards that stakeholders, it's largely investors, is what you hear about the most, but it can be others, customers, employees, even the community that you operate in, suppliers are asking for information about how you impact the environment, how you impact social considerations, and then how the company manages it around those risks, if you will. People are interested in just how organizations think about those risks and how they mitigate those risks and pursue opportunities. And then just how the company operates, that's the governance side. How does it control itself? That's what ESG is.
Okay.
It covers a wide range of topics.
I was going to say, yeah, even just hearing you describe that and the fact that it can, well, maybe mean something different to everybody, but just even some of those interests, you hear a lot of the headlines around the interest in the public and or the investors or whatnot around achieving certain standards. And that all kind of fits under this ESG umbrella, I guess. Is that what I'm
That's right.
hearing?
I
Okay.
think too, when you're talking to someone, if they are a company that issues or an organization that issues an ESG report, it means one thing to the person that does that ESG reporting. For an investor, they might be thinking of something different when they're talking about ESG. A lender might be thinking about something different. A supplier, a customer, it might be the same topic just from a different angle. And so you do kind of have to figure out where people are coming from. And then there is a broad range of knowledge. So you have to figure out where people are at. There are different drivers. If you've got a customer that wants a sustainable product and wants to know what way you produce it, how you do your operation, that can be ESG, but it's very specific on what the customer wants. If you want to respond to that customer, there's certain things you want to do. That's different than if it's an investor
Right.
who wants to know how you operate, how you're managing your environmental risks and your social risks. In terms of helping people, really why they need help with ESG is really an important thing to ask about and really listen for when you're talking with people to help them.
Probably touched on a little bit here, but I guess why? If I'm a business owner, if I'm an executive of a business, why do I care about ESG right now?
The easy ones are when you have an investor. It says, like, we have a fair number of clients that we help with now that they're trying to raise capital, and the investor says, I can't invest in you if you don't have an ESG strategy, or you can't tell me what your performance is. Those are the easiest ones. Or someone who's got a customer who says, hey, I can't award this work to you because I don't know what your safety record is, and we only do work with companies that have great safety records, great safety performance. We don't want to work with contractors who are dangerous. What we also hear a lot from, smaller private entities who are hearing about it in the news and then approach us. Usually their motivations are, they can be a variety of things, but an initial reaction can be, hey, we're already doing most of this. Especially if it's a family business and they say, we've got a vision and a mission and core values. And it's interesting, half people will say, we're already doing all this. Why do we need to do anything? And then the other half will say, oh, we're already doing this. We need to tell people, because if we don't tell them, they don't know. This is going to be, straightforward for us. One unique thing about ESG is that there are ratings firms that will score your performance, and they largely do that by just looking at public information. In fact, in many cases, that's all they will consider is public information, and they'll scrape your website to look for information about how you perform. And then they rate you, and a lot of people don't like that. They don't like someone else controlling the perception of their organization. They want to control that. They get into it to say, we want to make sure we've got our information out there so that we get recognized for what we're doing. Oh, sometimes too, it can be that, particularly for families that maybe are in like the third or fourth generation, and they say, we've got these great stories about our organization, but they're being lost as people retire and move on. We're losing our history. And so ESG reporting can be a way to memorialize that great history, and keep track of what you're doing today that's really good for the community and your employees and your customers. So that can be a motivation. A lot of ESG has to do with efficiency improvements. And so it can be a nice platform for executives to, really drive efficiency improvements that increase the bottom line, improve the bottom line. That can be a driver. Some private entities just want to operate like a public company. They want to have the same financial and operational discipline. They'll pick the best practices that work for them. But because this is becoming mainstream in large public companies, they want to get on board with that. Particularly on the environmental side, they might want to compare how they perform versus other companies, and they might not have the experience to put those metrics together or even know what the metrics are in their industry. So we'll help with that. Certainly when people, are thinking about selling their company today, or just want to be ready in case they were to have a buyer come along. They don't want to be caught flat-footed. They want to, have reports in place in case the buyer wants to see their ESG record, because it is increasingly becoming an important area for due diligence. There's quite a bit of debt available today, funding, loans, and bonds that are can be tied to sustainability performance, and those people have put that money up willing to take a lower return as long as they know that money is meeting some criteria to reduce emissions or improve some social performance in a company. And so you can get a lower interest rate, but that usually requires audited ESG performance reporting, so that can be a driver. But most of the time they're trying to raise capital, and they can't get capital without ESG reporting, or it's customer driven. They lost a bid, or they just seeing that their competitors are getting more opportunities in the marketplace because they've got a low carbon product or a better health and safety record, or they can certainly now attract and retaining employees can be a real competitive advantage. So there's a variety of reasons, but those are the ones that we get when they're not being pushed by investors or customers.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I honestly, I work a lot with families, closely held business, multi-generational businesses, and even just seeing that as a way to memorialize, or even just make sure that you're ready for kind of that liquidation event or whatnot. But I'd be curious a little bit on the reporting, because you mentioned you can have audited statements, and kind of how has that, I guess, evolved or developed, and I mean, what levels are there? I think is probably the biggest question. I'm sure many that are interested in this sort of thing are, as a business owner or an executive, wanting to know kind of what are my options. And as with anything, right? There's a cost to the more in depth you go, I would imagine. So yeah, could you talk a little bit about what reporting actually looks like here?
Yeah, so there are multiple standards, and a lot of people get caught up in that, get confused by, and sometimes use that as a reason not to do it really. But the
It's
standards
almost
are
overwhelming, I would assume, right?
yeah, it can be just
yeah,
overwhelming.
yeah.
Yeah. Standards, are consolidating. If you really are in the ESG business, you got some people who have different approaches, but it's not hard to figure out what the standards are. You do have some choices, but it's fairly straightforward, and it's increasingly being viewed like financial reporting. It's just reporting of, a lot of people use the term non-financial. I don't think that's the best term, because, certainly like in our business where, your revenues are all tied to your people's performance, and attracting and retaining that talent, that is financial, right?
Right.
So sometimes I don't know that non-financial is the best term for it, but people are making financial decisions using that data. Investors are deciding whether or not to invest in you. Lenders are deciding at what rate they're going to lend to you at. It needs to have the same level of rigor that you do in your financial statement. And just like in financial statements, I've worked with a CFO who just went straight to the balance sheet, the income statement, the statement of cash flows, kind of bypassed all that management discussion and analysis. He really just cared about the financial statements, the tables themselves. ESG is increasingly becoming that way. Most ESG reports have a data table in the back, and a lot of people now just go straight to the data table and put more emphasis on that data, and that's increasingly happening. And regulation is expected if you're listed in the United Kingdom or in the European Union. There are strict requirements now on ESG reporting, and they're kind of phasing in. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has indicated they're going to propose a climate-specific rule in early 2022, so really any day. And that's going to, trickle down from public institutions into others. I think it's, a lot of people will use the analogy that the income statements and balance sheets as we know them today have not really been around that long. It's been less than 100 years, It was in the 1930s that those really became standard. And so we're kind of in the same place with ESG reporting. We're at the very beginning. If you were to jump forward 50 years, probably the things that we're struggling with now are just going to be standard disclosure for practically any business.
Like if I'm somebody, let's say, I'm a middle market company, and maybe we haven't done anything before. Maybe we're we're in the third generation. We kind of think we're doing a lot, but ever had reporting. We're maybe looking for more of like a, maybe like a benchmarking perspective or something like that, just to kind of know where we are. How would that maybe differ from, somebody that's actively looking at, getting something done for like an investor or maybe some loan covenants?
Yeah, usually the best place to start is with the data that you have.
Okay.
And there will be a lot of data that you have. You just don't think of it as ESG data. Sometimes the best example is HR data. Hopefully you know how many employees you have. And if you're on the ball, what your retention rate is. What percentage do you lose every year? Maybe why. So that's a retention rate, but some companies don't track that, right? And diversity, which is a top issue now, is what do your diversity numbers look like? Of course, that can be really challenging for a small, especially family operation. But kind of inherent in the ESG space, if you will, is that if you start reporting those things internally, and especially if you report them publicly, guess what happens? You do things to make your performance better. You probably won't be satisfied with your retention rate or your, diversity numbers. And so a large part of ESG is really focused on disclosure, with the thought that just getting organizations to disclose data, whether it's that HR data or it's emissions data or waste data, the amount of water you use, if you do recycling, if I can just get you to report that, thinking is you'll do better. You'll recycle more, you'll use less water, you'll have lower emissions. And so it is very disclosure focused.
What is that adage? What gets measured gets done, or something like that. I mean, being able to stare the data straight in the eye, and see how it applies to your organization. Yeah, that might make you change some things. Now, have you encountered anybody that's maybe a little bit nervous, say, about doing this because they almost, it's sort of like, I don't necessarily want to know the numbers?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You've got to kind of take this attitude that, and I know this is like a business little catchphrase that, people get tired of hearing, but the data are what they are, right? You've got to get comfortable with that. They're going to be things that are going to be very unsatisfying, and you just accept that that's what it is. And you'll get better over time. I find in my experience in business is that when you shine a light on something, like intensely focus on it, you can get really great at about anything. You've got to kind of get over that. Diversity is a great one. There are some organizations, I don't want to pick out an industry or anything.
Sure.
There's some organizations, their numbers are, just not good. and they publish it, and they're very large public entities. I always say, if they can publish it, anyone can. I mean, if they've bitten the bullet and done it, anyone can do it. And the thing is, once you get it out there, my experience has been you get comfortable with it, and especially when you can show in some improvement. And a lot of ESG is that way, particularly in the public markets. A challenge that people have, and you hear this term a lot. People use this kind of language a lot in ESG, is that don't try to boil the ocean. In other words, ESG is this very broad thing, and you can just get lost in the size of it. And so focus in on a few things that you can control, that you're going to get value out of, that's going to help you attract more customers, that's going to help you attract more employees, that's going to reduce waste and inefficiency and improve the bottom line. Focus on those first. Get that way, you're doing something that makes really good business sense. A lot of people try to do it all at once. It's usually better. And then in the public markets, my experience has been they would just like incremental improvement year over year. They're not looking for like suddenly you're going to have the lowest emissions in your industry ever overnight. They know that that's not going to happen. But could you get emissions down year over year, for example? A lot of it is as simple as, in the business world, is revenue going up or is revenue going down? What's the trend? Is net income going up or is net income going down? Kind of what's the trend there? ESG is as simple as that. Is our incident rate going up or down? If it's going up, what are we doing about it? If it's going down, let's not rest on our laurels. Let's figure out why it's improving, and let's build upon that. It's not that complicated. It just like in the financial world, if you look at, the last 3 to 5 years of your revenue, for example, you just look at your last 3 to 5 years of, pick your metric, and is it headed in a good direction or not? So it's not complicated. Getting that data can be difficult. If you don't have infrastructure around it, there's also a level of professionalism and just accepted way of doing things in finance and accounting that don't exist in the non-financial data. And so things that, companies just take for granted in financial data, that there are controls in place, that people know what controls are, that you're cross-checking your data, that you've got, good control on your IT systems that provide you that data. That doesn't exist with a lot of operational data. And so that can be kind of the more difficult part, making sure that you have as much confidence in your environmental, social, and governance data as you do on your income statement and balance sheet.
Maybe if you don't really have that infrastructure, is it, or the systems in place to be able to pull the data, or whatever it might be? Because I would imagine that's challenging to get the reporting if you can't get the input to do the reporting. So is that part of the process? How does that fit in to, maybe getting ready for it? Or is that actually part of the reporting that you'd be doing?
Yeah. So all of that data is usually in systems,
Uh-huh.
right? It's in a system, and they are, quite frankly, accounting systems. They just are measuring different units than dollars. Number of them. I keep going back to HR data because that's what, everyone's kind of has that data. Number of employees, gender of employees, those kind of things haven't always had kind of those controls, but you have that data, and your HR system is accounting for that data. You just don't think of your HR system as an accounting system, and your HR system might be spreadsheets if you're small enough, but that's your accounting system.
Right.
I think the thinking of it as an accounting system and bringing the same discipline is good, but they can be very disparate systems. If you've got a large workforce and you do dangerous work, and so health and safety of your workforce is really important. You might have an incident management system, which might be separate from your HR system. Employee development and training is really important. What kind of system do you have for that? How much, a common metric is like how many hours of training do your people take each year? On what topics can you produce that information? You're asking data from systems that just haven't been asked for that data before. It's usually there. It just hasn't been queried that way. And some people don't have systems, or they've got antiquated systems, and we help with that. We help people pick systems, which can be really important. Good system design can facilitate things happening better, faster, more efficiently. Not as good design can help do things, but just not really efficiently. And so, being very thoughtful in how you pick systems and grow systems, and the discipline about implementing systems is really important in ESG.
I guess maybe then the next step is you've identified some of these areas and maybe you didn't like the result. And like you said, you're going to try and work on the incremental improvement. How do you go about that? I mean, do you develop an action plan? Do you assign responsibility to a certain person, a group? What does that typically look like? And I'll probably answer my own question in part by saying I'm sure it depends on what the thing is. But yeah, what's your advice there?
It depends on the organizational dynamics very much. But like a lot of things, having a high level executive sponsor is usually really important. Governance, as I said before, is, given the greatest weight in a lot of areas, because like I said, if you've got good governance, a lot of things fall in place. And so if you've got a board or equivalent of a board and investment committee, or, depending on your organization, saying, hey, we want to see this data, and how's it look? Are we performing well or not? What do you think? That accountability really helps get to good end results. And the funny thing is that people get excited about it. Working for an organization that wants to be a good operator, I call it a good, well-run business, is empowering. In my experience, a lot of times you'll have advocates for certain programs, are passionate about the environment. And so they're very passionate about like recycling programs, or, the footprint that the organization's doing. Maybe they've got, come from a diverse background. And so diversity is really important for them, something that they're very focused on and passionate about in their career. Or it's can be education, employee education, variety of things. But a lot of times there can be some internal advocates who just really want to get engaged and be involved, who drive things. That's a common thing that we see that's a little bit less formal, just kind of naturally happens. But there is some truth to that thought, that if you just publish the numbers, the performance data, people will want to do better. And however that is in their organization, that it tends to happen. It is different in every organization, what works and what doesn't. So you've got to be careful. You can give examples of what I've seen work at other organizations, and that may or may not fit.
And is that the role that you're often playing? Because I mean, obviously there's a reporting piece, but I think certainly the reporting is important for like we mentioned, any of those number of factors there, the clients, the loan, the whatever, right? But the doing something about it, that seems like that is probably a kind of, you're like you're embarking on this journey almost and it can probably seem like a lot out of the gate. You go almost any one direction. Is that something that you do, your team does to be able to help support?
Yeah, so it's process improvement type work, I'll say. And there are best practices for different areas. So common best practices, like pick an ESG issue, is that there's training backing it up, that there's policies and procedures, so it's clear on who's accountable and what expectations are, that there's some routine reporting, performance reporting in place. Those are common things, like across topics. If you want to get at something, it usually involves them training and policies and procedures, processes and reporting. It's helping people put those things in place. And, if there is something unique about a particular topic, making them aware of that too.
You've thrown out some great tips there, best practices. Where do you start? Again, maybe we'll use my example. I'm a third generation proverbial widget maker over here, a family-owned business. Where do I start if I'm looking to implement something?
We usually start with education and governance.
Okay.
Right? Like, what is ESG? And depending on what your industry you're in, it's different. You just have different risks. If you're in the agricultural business, health and safety can be really important. That's, can be very dangerous work. Whereas if you're in the services industry, like an accounting firm, not a lot of physical risk at work. You got
to watch out for those paper cuts, Dirk.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Could hurt us here. Although there's not much paper anymore.
Maybe eating too much at lunch, stuff like that. Maybe that's a universal risk.
There you go.
So it's kind of mapping out what fits your industry. But governance is a great place to start. Where do we already have data? What are other people, what you consider your peers, what are they doing that might work for you? Definitely benchmarking is that category, doing some benchmarking. People are usually really interested in benchmarking data. People are also interested in how it's organized in their peer companies. Do they have someone who's just does ESG, or have they distributed it out to a whole bunch of people? Do they have a guidance committee, or is it really just run up through like the main operations person or the CEO? They want to know how it's organized, just so they can think about how it might work best in their organization, or what the range of how people are organized is. That's usually a starting point.
I'm kind of hearing you say, you got to work with what you got and maybe set realistic expectations and goals around that. Like maybe if you're in that industry or one of those industries that maybe doesn't have great diversity numbers traditionally, you almost kind of have to start with, what's reasonable and how we're going to move the needle potentially over time.
That's right. Yeah. Like, I think people don't want to accept incremental improvement. A lot of times that's us helping people say, hey, let's just get started and see what that looks like after we get started. And then, we really want to do things that make sense for the business. Again, where we can improve efficiency, improve the bottom line, where we can position ourselves better with our customers. It's really usually good to do those things where you can add some value right out of the gate.
Yeah. Is there anything that we haven't talked about so far that you think is kind of relevant to the conversation and maybe kind of where things are heading here as we kind of continue forward in the future of ESG?
Yeah, well, I think, certainly the hot topics, COVID, how's that impacting your business? That's still relevant. I think after 2 years of it, people are a little worn out or have figured it out for the most part, but new things are coming up all the time. Social issues, diversity are top of mind right now. Employee retention obviously is top of mind, and how to do that and get better at it in today's environment, which is just different, at least in my lifetime. I've never seen anything quite like it is today. And then climate. Climate is a number one issue, and that's becoming increasingly important as we have, quite frankly, more and more extreme weather events that are even more extreme than ever imagined possible.
Right.
That seems to be almost a regular occurrence, and becoming more common each year. It is front and center, and certainly with the administration today, climate is a number one priority, and managing that risk is being pushed through the financial system, through depository organizations, banks, credit unions, and through insurance organizations and just the whole financial industry. What that's going to look like and how that's going to evolve is happening right now with regulators, and how that's going to impact different financial organizations is of interest. So those are like the hot topics.
I enjoyed our conversation here, Dirk. I hear the term thrown around a lot, and even just hearing you talk about it, and even with the weight maybe of the letters, the G versus the E perhaps. And, this is very helpful, but any last comment or thought that you'd leave our listeners with here today?
I think, ESG is, I like to say it's about half risk management, half efficiency improvement. And it's really just a platform for being a great business and being able to prove that you're a great business, having data to show that you're a great business. And, if you think about it that way, it can be used to develop competitive advantages on many levels: customer retention, employee retention, efficiency improvements. It's a great platform for business improvement.
I like that. And I think that really boils it down. We're not boiling the ocean, we're boiling it down here now to really why it's such an effective tool and probably why it's being talked about so much. And then particularly, I would think impactful for the middle market, like you said, and middle market companies just looking to continue to improve. Well, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Damien. Thanks for having me. I feel honored to be on your podcast.
I will say the honor's mine, but we're happy to have you on. I have a feeling that we're going to be, we may have to have you back someday, because I think this is going to continue to be a hot topic, like you said. And just given the amount it's evolved in the short time frame that we've dealt with it, I would imagine it's going to just continue to do that. So thank you for sharing with us today, and we'll be talking soon.
All right. Thanks, Damien.
Want to learn more about ESG, Dirk, and how he can help? Check out the additional resources available in the show notes of this episode, available at bkd.com/simplytax, which is where you'll also find the link to sign up for and watch the archive of our Future Focus webinar that I mentioned at the start of this episode. If you haven't already, please connect with us and let us know what you think of SimplyTax with an email to simplytax@bkd.com or on social media. You'll find me on Twitter, where I tweet about tax at Damien Martin CPA, on Instagram at TaxDad, on YouTube by subscribing to our SimplyTax YouTube channel, and out on LinkedIn. I'm Damien Martin, and thank you for listening.
The information contained in this episode of Simply Tax is based on data available as of the date of its release. BKD is under no obligation to update this information if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances. Any information provided is not to be considered as tax, legal, or financial advice. Please consult your tax advisor before acting on any matters covered.